Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the last part of chapter 3 in the book we are currently reading, and that is Mary's Message to the World, written by Annie Kirkwood. So, of course, in this chapter, we are talking about and reading about Mary and Joseph's life on earth. So I stopped right exactly halfway through the chapter. That was about, I think, 20 pages. So we're just going to pick up where we left off. So it's kind of feels like we're stopping in the middle of a sentence, but we aren't. Okay. Actually, if you didn't catch my last video, where we left off was Joseph and Mary went to Cairo and lived there for many years until they felt it was safe to return, and they waited for that reassurance from God. When King Herod died, Mary wanted to come back to her hometown with Joseph and with baby Jesus, and Joseph didn't feel quite ready. So he waited for an answer or from a sign from God, and he did get that sign. And so we're going to pick up kind of in that area of the story. Although she's kind of jumping around because she talks about the way Jesus was as a baby. She talks about, actually, no, I take that back. She does not jump around. She talks about Joseph and her and their journey. And then she talks about the birth of Jesus. And then she talks about the birth of her second son. And then the coming of other children and how Jesus was as a little boy and how he was with his siblings and the children of the village where they lived. Okay. And Joseph, where we left off at the end here, was that Joseph took Jesus to a school when he was 12 years old, and that was in Egypt. And the reason for that is because he was starting to ask some questions, challenging the elders. And I think the elders were beginning to understand that this little boy was wise beyond his years and constantly challenging them and correcting them in just knowing that some of the things they were sharing were not right, at least to him. And that could have been the case as well, but to the elders, I'm sure they didn't look at it like that. And it probably was also had a matter of safety to think about. All right. He was there for 2 years and then returned to our home. So that's how long Jesus was at this school in Egypt, in Cairo, I believe. Once again, Joseph and I prayed to God to give us some direction in preparing this child to do his work, as was foretold. A distant relative came to visit in our town. He was a merchant who traveled in many exotic lands where spices and silks were obtained. He continually told of the ways and customs of other lands. At the age of 14, Jesus was apprenticed to this distant relative. He was to travel and learn all he could about other people and the world in general. This was our way of keeping Jesus hidden until God ordained for Jesus to begin his mission. We were not sure what the mission would entail. I bet that felt very scary for them. During these years, when Jesus was traveling about the world, I prayed constantly. I meditated and did all manner of sacrifices to ensure Jesus' safety. In the meantime, Joseph and I raised our other children. These children missed Jesus very much, even the youngest, who was a girl. The first child after Jesus was James. He was quick-tempered, loud, and boisterous. He did not learn as fast as Jesus, but he made up for this lack by his wily ways. He was a sly one and very astute. James became a carpenter. In his manhood, he had a lovely wife in Sarah and a total of 5 children who lived. They also had 3 who died in infancy. They remained close and made their home near our home. These grandchildren were the light of my life. Sorry, I forgot to tell one of my children I was filming and they opened the door. My bad. These grandchildren were the light of my life. They asked many times about my trip to Egypt. It seemed to them a marvelous thing to be able to travel. They asked much about Jesus. David and Daniel were born 11 months apart, and we treated them like one, or like twins. David was a strong and large-built man. Even as a child, he was large, or so it seemed, because Daniel was so small and quiet. David was not really a loud, boisterous person, but he could sound loud because of his size. David was the type of person who had little to say, but when he did speak, everyone listened. He was a very loving man, and in spite of his size, he was gentle. David was a carpenter and a horseman. He was very good with children and animals, especially horses. David married and had 6 children of his own, so that's one of her other children, is David. Next, there was Daniel, a sickly little fellow, she refers to him as, most accident prone. He never married and helped in the carpentry shop as best as he could. He was the first of our children to leave the earthly life. He died a short time before Joseph. I would say he learned many spiritual lessons from his infirmities. He remained quiet and loving throughout his life. You wonder why Jesus did not heal him. Jesus wanted to, but Daniel was not of the mind to be healed. It takes the cooperation of the sick person in order to be healed. He was not in pain, just that through his illnesses, which were many, he was in a state of communication with God. Not everyone can be healed. This was an area of sadness for Jesus. He so wanted to help Daniel. And I think that's something that the Bible tends to leave out, is that Jesus could not and did not heal everybody. First off, you had to have, he saw right away if he would be able to heal a person by looking at their energy around them, and would know if that was something that was possible. And then he always told them, go forth and sin no more after he would heal them, because he knew that if their consciousness wasn't of a certain place or wasn't in a certain place, that they would fall ill again with whatever it was he just healed them from. Then there was Elizabeth. I named her after my good friend and relative, Elizabeth, mother of John. She was a tough little girl. She chased the boys and brought flowers from the fields. She had a strong mind and her father's temperament. She was quick to anger, but fast to forget the argument. This ability to forget could be upsetting to others at times. Elizabeth could be so very angry one minute, and it would be all forgotten the next. She would be ready to continue with the friendship without any rancor. Through her life, she learned to temper her anger. She became a strong, caring lady. She had many children, 9 altogether. They were the delight of her life. Next was Jacob, who was named after his grandfather. He was also a strong and muscular young man. He had a very mild temperament and was happy with himself and the world. There were no known enemies to him, and he never found any. I think I skipped a page. And he never found any. Sorry, I read that wrong. Jacob was more inclined to farming, and in his later life, he did this for a living. His love of animals and the outdoors were his source of joy. He had a large family of 10 children. His wife was just as loving, and he was capable of guiding the children in their religious and spiritual training. Then came sweet Ruth. She and Mary were the apple of their father's eye. Ruth was such a quiet and loving child. She loved to clean and cook. Her love was in the care of the house and in making special meals for our Sabbath. Ruth dearly loved Jesus and would take each word as a source of great information. Ruth was a very spiritual person, naturally. She had 4 children whom she loved dearly. The children's spouses were good people who took right away to the family and to the work of Jesus. They supported our family and Jesus as best they could. Not one of the children's spouses was adverse to Jesus or to his teachings. I was well pleased with all these added children. And last was Mary Martha, very quiet and very stubborn. She was much like her father, but in a quiet way. She was a happy child because she had much love bestowed upon her. She reminded Joseph of his mother. She was slow to anger, but also slow to get over her hurt feelings and anger. This young lady was, in her later life, a mother of 6 children. Her specialty was in sewing and in working to make beautiful cloths for the home. She was also quite a good cook and took good care of Daniel, her brother. Now then, we have given a good view of our family. My main message, though, is to every person on earth, to every individual who will bring his mind and heart to God, whatever his view of God is, to expand his concept of God, to expand his view of God's power and love. Here, we asked about Mary and Joseph's childhood. I will be glad to tell a little of our family origin, a little of mine and Joseph's childhood. Also, I will tell how I incarnated to aid those on earth to understand the marvels of the spiritual life, which they had forgotten in their daily life. As I said, I was 16 Earth years when Jesus was born. My family consisted of my parents, 3 sisters, and 1 brother. My brother was named after my father, Hosea. My 3 sisters were Martha, the oldest, then Hosea, my brother, Ruth, then me, and the youngest was Delphia. We lived in the outskirts of Nazareth on what is today called a farm. We had animals, sheep, and hens, and grew vegetables. The work was done by all in the family. There was plenty of work to be done, as we not only grew vegetables for ourselves, but also to sell. The hens, ducks, and geese were our main source of income, as they not only produced meat, but also eggs. We had cows for milk and butter. My mother was known in town for her pastries. Once a month, we would all bake breads, both sweet and non-sweet, to sell in town. This was the highlight of our month, to go to town to sell our breads, geese, ducks, hens, and roosters. At times, we had a lamb or 2. During the month before the Sabbath, my brother would take eggs to town as he had merchants who wanted all the eggs we could produce. And so was my life as a child and a young girl. My marriage to Joseph was an arranged marriage. From time to time, the matchmaker would visit our home as he and his wife traveled about. They got to know the children and saw how we were developing in our religious beliefs, in our abilities in the home, or for the men in training. Our temperament was noted, and we were questioned about many of our likes and dislikes. It was a slow process which developed over the years of my childhood. Our parents were consulted about what they had in mind for each of us. This was the custom of the day. We did not have a choice in our selection. We were always instructed that our best attitude was one of compliance. We were to accept the chosen husband and make the family proud by being the best wife a man could want. I'm so sorry. We were taught cooking, cleaning, sewing, and all the domestic chores. Our duties to God and our heritage were part of our training. As women, we were taught about our holidays and how to prepare for them. Cleanliness was very important. The preparations of our meals were an honor to God. We learned all these lessons, including those in which our talents were developed. My mother's talent was in baking. My sister Martha's was in making very neat stitches and in sewing. My talents were in the ways of healing and in caring for the sick. Thus, everyone had her own specialty, and it was developed. Now, this sounds like all we did was work, and at times it did seem so. But we also played games as children and had our pets to care for. We loved running through the fields and chasing the butterflies and watching the streams of water as they passed through our fields. We could see the tadpoles and the frogs. We grew close to nature, and through it came a great appreciation for our Creator. My childhood was not too different from anyone else's of that time. One thing, though, our parents truly loved and respected each other. Their love was an example to us of what a good marriage could be. We had neighbors who were not happy in their marriage. Their children were our friends. These friends were not very happy or proud of their parents. I decided very young that I would love my husband. He would be the most respected and honored man. I would teach my children how to love by example, as my parents had. People were not too different than you are today. These were lessons I am sure our parents taught, but I am not exactly sure when or how it occurred. It was natural to be happy and to be grateful to God for His goodness. God was a big part of our lives. From childhood, God was alive in our home and in our daily lives. I never remember Father complaining, but I'm sure he must have, as he was very human. He was a very easygoing man who seldom lost his temper. He was big and strong from the work on the farm. Father was a happy man, always singing and laughing, telling us stories with morals to them. Every day was a new adventure and a new lesson, he would say. Mother was quiet and spent much time in prayer. She quietly led the girls in the lessons of making a home happy. She instilled in us the knowledge that the home environment was set by the lady of the house. It was the mother's responsibility to God to have a clean, well-organized home, one which was truly a haven from the elements and the outside world. My parents were devout and very close to God. He was not only the God in the temple, but he was a part of their daily lives. In our day, there were many who only maintained the holy days as a tradition, those who did not put their hearts and souls into living daily with God. My parents, on the other hand, felt God's presence very deeply. Now, Joseph, as you can guess, was a town boy, as his father was a carpenter. He learned his trade from his father, but as he is here, I will allow him to tell you his story. So he's joining, and this is Joseph's story. And then after Joseph's story, we're going to read about the Assumption and other lives that they lived on earth, and that will complete this chapter. All right, Joseph's story. My story is quite simple. I was born in Nazareth and came from a very devout family. My parents were not as demonstrative as Mary's. However, their love for us was in every word. Have you ever known people who could not say the words, but when they looked into your eyes, you could see the love in their hearts? These were my parents. My mother was very quiet and had little to say. Father was the disciplinarian and the ruler of the roost. He was a boisterous fellow, happy and jolly, but he was also quick-tempered, and we children knew better than to cross his word. As quickly as his temper went off, that was how quickly he was over it. Mother, on the other hand, held long to her angers and hurts. It took much cajoling to get her to smile. It was not that she was angry all the time or unhappy. Her ways were quieter and more serious. We were 4 boys and 3 girls. The order was as follows. Abraham was the oldest. He could be described as more like Mother in quietness and his ability to overcome sadness or anger. But he was fun-loving and always had a joke or two. He married, and his family was composed of 6 boys and 1 girl. He left Nazareth after he married and moved to another small town close by. They visited my parents frequently and brought the grandchildren with them. Next to Abraham was another brother named Amos. He was a thin and sickly individual who never married. He was quiet and learned carpentry, but enjoyed working on smaller pieces of wood, making toys and small objects. Then was David, quite a joker, very loud and boisterous. He was large and heavily built, even as a child. David married early in life and helped Father in the shop. He could build very beautiful pieces of furniture. He would hand polish them to a sheen. His work was almost an art form. He spent many hours carving roses and flowers in the furniture pieces. This is why his work was treasured. David married, and his marriage was not exactly ideal. They had 4 children, 3 of whom died before reaching the age of majority, leaving 1 child, a daughter, whom he loved dearly. She was very spoiled, and soon it became apparent that she would not find happiness either. No one could treat her as well as her father. And then came my 3 sisters, all in succession, Elizabeth, Dorothea, and Tantya. I'm not sure how to say that, sorry. These girls were the apple of Father's eye. He was crazy for the girls, and so were we. He taught us to care for the women and to see that their needs were met with little effort. The girls were all very pretty and very cooperative. Never did one of them give Mother or Father 1 moment's worry. They were always with Mother and followed her everywhere. Then I was born, the youngest and the strongest of the lot. I received much attention and love. Maybe that is why it was easy for me to love Mary and to care for her. Father set a good example of how to care for the women of the house. He was getting on in age when I was a young man, and he turned over the shop to David and me. I learned much from Father and David in the art of woodworking. I loved the smell of wood. It had the smell of home. I had been told about Mary, how lovely she was, and how perfectly matched we were. My parents made all the arrangements for the betrothal. I was 20 years old when Jesus was born. It was a big shock to find that Mary was already with child, and at first I had many misgivings. How could she do this? Why would she want to marry me? I thought some young farm boy had become involved with her. Then the angel of the Lord came to me in a dream, and I understood. But understanding something does not make the task any easier. It was a year almost before I took Mary as my wife. That was a big sacrifice for a young man, but I spent many hours in prayer. I learned through Mary that God was a big part of our lives and would always be. Mary could take me by the hand, talk to me, and soothe my inner stirring with words of comfort and wisdom. She was always very loving and demonstrative. This I truly love in her. She is and has always been very special to me, and now to the whole world. Our marriage was one of happiness and joy. Our only worry was in doing what God had asked of us, to teach Jesus all we could, to see to it he received a good education in our Jewish heritage and in spiritual ways. It was with sorrow that I took him to the school away from home. I loved this one so much. But I knew I had a responsibility to God and to Jesus. When Jesus went away to the far-off lands, I had to remain strong for Mary. Not that she was an excessive worrier, but she was a mother. We comforted each other, and through the years, we built such a relationship that to this day, it still exists. On the whole, our children were good and did not give us too many problems, like some children did in those days. For then there were thieves, murderers, and all kinds of evilness. Our children were taught by our religious methods to honor all the commandments. At the beginning of our trip to Egypt, I was frightened and spent many of the hours on the road in prayer and in talking to God. What I have gotten myself into, I wondered. Will we ever return to our home? What will our families think when we do not return? I prayed for God to give me the wisdom and strength to know what to do and when to do it. In dreams, the Lord would calm my fears. He opened my mind to see the beauty of his world around me. I began to get excited about living in another land and in learning to speak a different language. It is all a matter of attitude anyway, how you approach life. It is an adventure or it can be great sorrow. Wise words. I had seen the quiet, unfeeling ways of my mother and the openness of Mary with her love and her friendly ways. I cautioned Mary not to call attention to us and to keep her smiles to herself. She was always to remain in the background of Jesus's work, I cautioned. This was what we were sent for, to support our son and to give him love and care. Those years in Egypt, we both matured and grew in the Lord. We set the pace for our marriage. It was easy since all we had was each other. There was never any question of our loyalty or faithfulness. We had one goal and one cause. His name was Jesus. Our other children would simply be an added joy. I told Mary, they would be for our old age, as Jesus belonged to the whole world. I died when Jesus was still preaching in the countryside in the last year of his life. He was far removed from our family. This he did on purpose. He did not want us to suffer because of his preaching. He simply told us that we would all live and be together forever. At times, his words were very strange to me, but I knew he was anointed by God, that his words came from God the Father, as Jesus always called God the Father. Mary and Joseph have been together in other lifetimes. This is a little side note from the author. Since their life with Jesus, they have a strong love bond that will last for eternity. The following provides a little information about those lifetimes. So we're still talking about sort of their life together until we get a bit further on. So I thought I was going to be able to do this video in 2 parts, but we still have to talk about the Assumption and their other lives, which is its whole other section. And leaving those 2 parts aside, our 3rd video will be relatively short. So I'll finish reading this section, and then we will stop and read the last 2 shorter sections in video number 3, okay? Joseph and I had a very special relationship, which was unusual for that day. We truly loved each other. Our love simply grew with each child. We enjoyed each of their personalities and their differences. They were all individuals with minds of their own. Their individuality at times led to some loud words being spoken. We always reminded them that we were one family, and as such, it was important to remain concerned with the entire family as a whole. This we stressed more than once. When it came time for Joseph to depart this life, we made a commitment to be with each other for all time. We decided our love, which we were willing to have continue to grow, would incorporate the entire world. All people would be our children, and we would love all creation, as the Father God does. We also learned much from Jesus and his teachings. Jesus, as the Christ, taught us many things, and we were happy to receive these teachings from him. In my old age, I lived with David, this is Mary speaking, and then with the girls and their families. In the last years, I was unable to work and spent my time telling the younger children the stories I learned from Jesus. I also taught some of the neighbor children and other grandchildren to seek God in their hearts and minds. This was the beginning of my message, which I have through all these years continued to give to the world. I spent much time in prayer and meditation in my last days on earth. The children and grandchildren thought I was resting, but I was, in reality, communing with God the Father. All right, we'll go ahead and stop right there. And in the last video, the Assumption and other lives. And as I said, those are not very long sections, but a little bit of a shorter video is kind of okay to break up the longer ones, which we have been reading longer ones with this one. It's very fascinating to learn these things. Thank you all very much for joining me. I love you all very much. And until I see you again, take care of yourself, take care of those around you, and I will see you for the last 3rd part of chapter 3 in Mary's message to the world. Bye-bye.